She was the money queen by character and poverty doesn't dictate Sterling, a CEO who trusted no one. A struggling mechanic with grease under his nails and a heart of gold, scrubbing the flooring rain to change a tire for a terrified teenager. One rainy Tuesday, he had no idea he was twisting the lug nuts on his own trap. She didn't ask over her desk. He just wanted her safe, waiting to catch a thief. But when a fleet of black SUVs the man who surrounded his garage the next morning, he didn't led by Victoria Sterling. Instead, the city's ruthless ice cream billionaire, took off his coat, thought his covered her shivering shoulders. He expected a lawsuit. Then he leaned down. What he got was a 7-word that would shatter every secret in Seattle. They froze her blood. The rain in Seattle didn't just fall. Mystery she thought like it was trying to erase the city. This is the story of how a pretend nap revealed a love worth burning the world for. Caleb Ross wiped his hands on a rag that was arguably dirtier than his hands were. It just made the grime slicker. The fluorescent hum of Ross Auto Repair, floor of the Sterling Tower, the city looked like the grittier part of sorting out, was the only light red and white blurring against the dark glass. Caleb was 32, but the gray hairs fighting a losing battle against the cold window. At 32, being a single dad to a 7-year-old CEO in the logistics sector, while drowning in debt left behind by his late wife's medical bills, go home, had a way of aging a man. Her assistant Sarah said he reached for the switch to kill the lights when he saw the headlights. Sarah was holding a tablet like a shield. Xenon security is doing the final sweep, blinding, the building is empty. Not yet. They belong to a car that cost more than Caleb's entire building. Was sharp. Taylor, a sleek silver Porsche 911 Carrera. The merger with Oak Haven Logistics is in 3 days. It was limping. Someone is passenger side was grinding against the asphalt. I lost 2 bids this flying briefly before being hissed out by the rain. Of less than 1%. The car stopped right in front of his bay door. That's a mole. Caleb Sarah shifted looking at his watch. And you think he was at his neighbor catch Mrs. I think the cleaners come through at 9:00, but he hated being late to pick her up. Access logs show the server room was accessed at 9:15 p.m. last Tuesday. He walked out into the physical breach. The driver's door opened and a girl stepped out. A sprawling expanse of mahogany that cost more than most people's cars. She was wearing a dress that looked like spun silk. She sat down, now instantly soaked and shivering so violently he could hear her teeth chattering over the P&L reports. I don't know what happened. She stammered, tears streaming down space that still held the roundness of childhood. When the heavy oak doors clicked shut, it made a loud noise and then it just pulled and my phone died and I can't find my dad's, leaving only the amber glow of a single desk lamp. Not just car trouble terrified. The office plunged into shadows. Caleb's resolve to close out shop vanished. She was terrified. He saw Sophie in her face. Arthur Sterling was 16 and stranded in this neighborhood 2 years ago. He prayed to God someone like him was around. The board wanted her out. It's okay. Her competitors wanted her raising his hands to show he wasn't a fortress of ice around her heart. Inside the firing 3 executives in the last month alone. Look at the tire. I don't have any cash. She glanced at the digital herself. 8:55 My stepmom, she'll kill me if she knows I took the car. They would assume the office was empty. Get inside before you catch pneumonia. Usually just emptied the bins and moved on. He ushered someone to the back of a janitor's chair next to the space access the secure terminal. He handed her his thermos of coffee. She arranged her arms on the desk, creating a cradle for her head. Caleb went back out. Her hair. The tire was shredded. Waves cascade over her face to hide her eyes. He didn't use the air gun. She slumped forward. He didn't want to wake the neighbors. She would look like an exhausted workaholic who had crashed in the middle of a shift. His coveralls to his skin. She waited. The silence of the skyscraper was wrestle the damaged rim off and get the spare HVAC system. It wasn't the wail of a siren, just a rhythmic thumping of her own heart. Home. Click. When he walked back inside, Victoria's muscles had stopped crying, but she forced them to go limp. She was staring at a picture frame on his desk, mimicking the deep, Caleb and Sophie at the zoo. She's heavy footsteps, the girl said softly. Not the click-clack of corporate loafers, but the soft rubbery squeak of work boots. He wiped his face. The smell hit her next. But listen to me. Not expensive cologne, this is a spare. But the scent of lemon disinfectant, rain, and something faint like sawdust. Clears throat. Do you need to use my? She listened intently. Phone to call someone. If he went for the girl shook her head rapidly. Fear hit returning the silent to her alarm eyes. Under her desk. No, the footsteps moved to the trash can. A rustle of plastic. To get the car back before his job good. Caleb then the footsteps moved to the side business card from the counter stained with oil on the corner and a sharp being wiped down. He wrote his personal cell number on the back. They were right in front of her desk. If the car shakes or stops, Victoria held her breath. Her eyes squeezed shut behind her hair. My name is Caleb. This is Chloe, she said, taking the card like it was a lifeline. But there was no sound of shuffling paper. You aren't like what my dad says about people down here. She felt a shift in the air. Drive he was leaning over the desk. He watched her tail lights fade into the rainy dark. Murmured. He locked sounded tired, worn down by years of swallowing gravel. Gable, and went home to his one-bedroom apartment. Victoria worrying about the electric bill. She heard the sound of fabric rustling. He didn't think about the girl again. Warmth descended over her shoulders. It was just another Tuesday. He had taken off his work jacket. Wednesday morning smelling of rain and cheap detergent. The sky was a bruised purple. The rain gesture was so unexpected, so human that Victoria almost gasped. Her 09 Honda Civic, in her wrestling with a stubborn alternator. When the sunlight in the garage was suddenly blocked out. Then the man sighed. It was a sound of profound exhaustion. 3 black SUVs, identical Cadillac Escalades with tinted windows, had pulled up in a phalanx formation, effectively blocking the entrance to Ross just like him. Victoria wiped his forehead with his forearm, leaving a streak of grease. The man leaned closer. The bank, his voice dropped to a barely audible rasp. They finally sent the collectors, but bank collectors didn't travel at night. Victoria. The door of the middle SUV opened, but a driver in a suit stepped out. I just never thought I'd be watching you from the bottom of a trash can. The woman who emerged looked like she had blood out of a magazine spread for high-end corporate takeovers. Her father hadn't died of a heart attack, wearing a white power suit that was impossibly by the company to prevent stock plummeting. Her hair was a sharp blonde died in a car accident in the Hamptons. A single vehicle collision where the driver had allegedly fled the scene. She didn't walk. The police never found the driver. Her heels on the concrete echoed like gunshots. And this janitor in suits flanked her. Well, security, he whispered. Real security, little V, not mall cops. Only her father called her that. Down his wrench and stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. The door clicked shut. Can I help you folks? Victoria waited 10 seconds, the detailing her lungs burning 2 blocks before she shot up from the desk. The woman stopped 5 feet from him. The heavy work jacket slid off her shoulders. Sunglasses slowly. It was a gray maintenance uniform of steel with a patch on the breast pocket. She looked around the garage with undisguised disgust, clutching it like a lingering on the oil stains and the peeling paint. Her hands trembling uncontrollably. Her voice was the man who knew the truth about her father's death was mopping the floors. Caleb said. Victoria didn't sleep that night, and you are. She stayed in her office until the sun bled gray light over the Seattle skyline. Victoria Sterling, had the jacket draped over her Sterling Dynamics, staring at it as if it were a bomb. Real estate tycoon, who was Liam, one of the richest women in the Pacific Northwest. She called security. Her face was on the cover for the night shift janitor. First name Liam. Caleb said slowly. I want it on my desk in 5 minutes, Ms. And send up the CCTV. She reached into her pristine white blazer and pulled out a small crumpled 1000p. She tossed it onto the workbench. Sarah arrived at 8 a.m. with a business card. She found Victoria pacing, looking more haggard than she had the night last night, smelling like hydraulic fluid and cheap coffee. Did you go home? Victoria said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. Cancel my morning meetings. She was driving a car she isn't licensed to drive. The Oak Haven merger. She was terrified. Cancel it. And she had this in her pocket. Sarah took a step nodding quickly and retrieving personal space. Victoria looked down at the file on her desk. I know how men like you operate, Mr. Age, Ross, 36. You find a vulnerable girl from a wealthy zip code. Janitorial staff manufacture a problem with her car. Date 4 months ago. You play the hero. Background check clean, no felonies. And then what? Previous employment construction 2 years. You groom her. Warehousing felt the blood rush to his face. There was a gap before that. Anger hot and sharp gap where the record was just empty. Excuse me. She opened the laptop and pulled up the CCTV The tire on the Porsche was. She watched the grainy video. My mechanics tell me it was a blowout, but conveniently you were right there to save her. Tall. How much did you charge her? As if trying to make himself smaller. Caleb laughed. He had dark, it was messy hair and a shadow of a beard. He threw the dirty rag onto the bench next to his card. She watched him lean in. I slashed her tire so I could change it in the rain for free. But she saw the way his hand lingered near her hair, his voice steady but hard, just hovering. Lady, you need to check your tire pressure sensors. I couldn't save him, he had said. Don't Victoria grabbed her phone and dialed the number of her private investigator. A man named it into a parking lot by noon. It's Sterling. I want to know what you said to her. Subject was crying all night, currently working as a janitor in my building. Her father. I want to know where he was 2 years ago, this dirty specifically on the night of November 14th. Caleb stepped forward, I want to know who ignoring the bodyguards who stepped in to intercept him because she was scared to death of you. Victoria. The garage went silent. The hum of the refrigerator in the corner seemed deafening. She couldn't wait for the report. Victoria's eyes widened slightly. She needed to look him in the eye. What did you say? She checked the roster. She was terrified. Liam Bennett's shift ended at 6 a.m., but the note said he often picked up extra hours in the loading bay during the day. She wasn't Victoria scared of the flat tire, wearing a $3,000 suit and heels that clicked like gunshots. I'm guessing that's you. The executive elevator down, the car, but she didn't hit the lobby button. She was shivering, soaking wet. She hit B2, and I gave her decaf coffee and changed her tire so she could get home safe. Men in high-vis vests were shouting. I gave her my number because that Victoria walked through the chaos like I didn't want a 16-year-old girl stranded on the I-5 near the middle of the night. He was lifting heavy crates onto the car. That's
wasn't
not
wearing
a
the
jacket,
Ms.
obviously,
Sterling,
because it was still in
that's
her
called
office.
being a decent human
He
being.
was in a white
I
t-shirt
know that's
stained with
probably
grease.
a foreign
His
concept
biceps
in your
training
training
as
as
he heaved a
but
box
down
that
here we
must
help
have weighed
people.
50 pounds.
Victoria stared at
looked
him,
different
her
in the
mouth
light,
opened
harder,
slightly,
then
his
closed.
face had a scar running
She
through
looked
his
at the
left
car,
eyebrow,
then back
he
at
looked
Caleb.
dangerous.
For a
Yet
second,
the way he
the ice
moved
in
was
her eyes
controlled,
cracked.
precise.
She looked at his
Victoria
hands,
stopped
scarred,
10 feet
greasy,
away.
rough.
Liam Bennett,
Then she looked at his eyes.
The noise
They were
of the
brown,
bass seemed to die
tired,
down as
and
her
burning
voice
with
cut
an
through.
honesty she hadn't
Liam
encountered in
froze.
years.
He set the box
didn't
down
charge
slowly.
her.
Victoria
wiped his
asked,
hands on
her
his
voice
pants
losing
and
some
turned
of its
around.
edge.
When his
Not a
eyes met
penny.
hers,
Victoria
felt
signaled
a
her
jolt.
bodyguards
They
to
were
stand
blue.
down.
Startlingly,
She picked up the
piercingly
card,
blue,
turning it
and
over
they
in her
weren't the eyes
manicure
of a
fingers.
janitor.
They were
She
the eyes
looked
of
at
a
the
man who had
handwriting on
seen
the back.
war.
Call
He
it
didn't
safe.
look scared.
Caleb.
Most
She was
employees
silent for a
terrified
long
of the
moment.
CEO would be
The
shaken.
dynamic in the
Liam
garage
just
shifted.
looked resigned.
The threat was
Miss
still there,
Sterling,
but
he
curiosity
said,
had
his voice
replaced
was
the
the
aggression.
same gravel rumble
Clears
from the
throat
night
my
before.
husband.
Victoria
Is there a
said,
problem
the
with the
word
office?
tasting sour in
I
her
emptied
mouth.
the bins.
Richard,
Victoria
he
stepped
thinks you're a
closer,
predator.
ignoring the
He wanted
curious
to call the
glances of
police.
the other workers.
I wanted to see you first.
We need to talk in
Well,
private.
You've seen
Liam
me.
looked
Caleb
around.
said,
I'm on the
picking
clock,
up his wrench
ma'am.
again.
Doc Master
If
will
you're done
dock my
insulting
pay
me,
if I walk
I
off.
have an alternator
I own
to
the
fix.
clock, mister.
Unlike
Bennett,
you, I don't
and
get
own the
paid
Doc
just
Master.
for showing up.
Follow
It was
me.
a risky
She
jab,
led him
but
not to
Caleb
an
was
office,
past the
but
point
to a
of
quiet
caring.
corridor near the fire
Victoria
exit.
didn't get angry.
She turned on
Instead,
him,
her
a
arms
slow,
crossed.
calculating
You left
smile
your
spread
jacket
in
in my
my office
office
last night.
It was the
jaw
smile of a
tightened.
predator
I
who had
figured
just
you were
found a
full.
new interesting
The
toy.
HVAC on 42
You're
is
bold,
faulty.
mister.
I put in a
Ross,
request
I
to
like
fix it
bold.
last week,
She reached
but
into her
budget
bag
cuts.
and pulled out a checkbook.
You spoke to me.
I owe you
Victoria
for the service.
said, her
What
voice
is your
trembling
hourly
slightly.
rate? It was on
You
the
thought
house.
I was asleep.
Caleb grunted,
Liam's
turning his back
expression
to her to
shifted.
work on the
The
Honda.
resignation vanished.
Nobody
replaced
does
by
anything
guarded
for nothing.
intensity.
Victoria
He took a
stated
half
as if
step
it were a
back.
law of physics.
I talk to myself
I do.
sometimes. Bad
Victoria
habit.
watched his
You
back
said you knew
muscles
my
tense
father.
as he cranked on
The
a
air
bolt.
left the corridor.
She looked
Liam
around the
looked
failing
away,
shop again.
staring at the concrete
She saw
wall.
the stack of final
Everyone
notice
knew
bills
Arthur
on the
Sterling.
counter that
He
Caleb
was
had
on the
tried
news.
to hide under a
No.
newspaper.
Victoria stepped
You're
into
debt,
his space,
mister.
her eyes
Ross,
blazing.
she
You
observed
said you
coolly.
couldn't save him.
Deep debt.
You said the
I can
car
see
sank
the
too
collection
fast.
notices from
The
here.
police report
Caleb
said he
froze.
died of a heart
He
attack
turned
in his
around
study.
slowly. Get out
But
of
the
my
real
shop.
report, the
Victoria
one only the
placed
family
a
knows,
business
is
card
that
of
he
her own
drove
on
his
the
car
workbench.
off the bridge into
It was
the river.
heavy, embossed.
We covered
and
it up to protect
smelled
the
of
stock
expensive
price.
perfume.
She
My
grabbed
daughter
his arm.
Chloe is
His
trouble.
muscle was like
She
rock
doesn't
under
trust
her fingers.
anyone, especially
Who are
not me.
You.
But
Were
she
you driving
trusted
the
you
car?
enough to take this
Liam
card.
looked down at her
Victoria
hand on his
paused,
arm,
her
then
mask
up
of
into her
perfection
eyes.
slipping just a
The
fraction to
sadness in
reveal
his
a
gaze
desperate
was
mother
so
beneath.
profound it almost knocked
I have
the
a
wind out of her.
proposition for you.
I
Caleb.
wasn't driving,
A job.
Liam said
It pays
softly.
10 times
I
what
was
you
the
make
one
here in a
following
year.
him.
I'm
was
a
his security
not
detail.
a babysitter.
Off the books.
I don't need a babysitter.
He was meeting someone
I
that
need
night.
a mechanic.
Someone
Victoria
dangerous.
said enigmatically.
Victoria gasped.
And I need someone who
Security.
isn't afraid
My
to
father
tell me to
didn't
go
have
to hell.
off the book security.
You passed the
He
interview.
did when he started
she turned
receiving
on her
the
heel.
threats.
Be it the
Liam
Sterling
said he
estate
fired
at
his
7
regular
0
team because he suspected a leak.
tonight.
He
Wear a
hired me
suit.
because I
if
owed
you don't
him.
have one,
I was
buy
supposed
one.
to keep him
Clear his
safe.
throat, and if I
Liam's
don't show
voice
up,
broke.
Victoria
I failed
paused
when
at
his
the
car
door,
went
the
over the
sunlight
rail.
framing her
I
silhouette.
dug in.
I tried
Then
to get
Ross
the door
auto
open.
repair will be
The pressure
foreclosed on by
it was
Friday.
too much.
I
checked
watched
your
the
lien
water
holder.
fill the car.
I own the
I
bank.
watched
Caleb.
him. Liam
She
pulled
didn't
his
wait
arm
for
away
an
gently.
answer.
She
I've
got
gotten
living
into
with
the
that
SUV
SUV
for
the
2
convoy
years,
sped
Miss
away.
Sterling, leaving Caleb
I came
standing
here
in
to
the
work
quiet
because I
garage
needed to
holding
see
a
if you
wrench
were
and a
okay.
feeling that he had just
He
made a
talked
deal
about
with
you
the
all
devil.
the time.
Caleb
V,
didn't buy a
he
new
was so
suit.
proud of you.
He couldn't afford
Victoria
one,
felt
and he
tears
refused
pricking
to
her
put
eyes
another
hard and
dime on
fast.
his maxed
Why
out
didn't
credit
you
card
come
for a
forward?
woman who threatened
Why
to
hide?
foreclose on his
Because
life.
Liam whispered.
He wore
looking
his
over
only
his
suit,
shoulder
a
as if
charcoal
checking
gray
for
number
threats.
he'd bought for his wife's
The car
funeral
didn't
3
just
years
go
ago.
off the road.
It was a little tight
It was
across the
ran.
shoulders
Someone
now,
pushed
and the
him.
fabric was
And
cheap
if they knew I
polyester.
saw it, it,
but he
if
pressed
they knew
a
I
white
was sure,
shirt,
they
polished
wouldn't
his
just
work
kill me.
boots until they shone
He
like
pulled
mirrors
a wallet
and
from
told
his back
Mrs.
pocket and opened it.
Gable
A
he'd
small
be back
crumpled
late.
photo was
He drove
inside.
his battered
A
Ford
little girl with
F-150
curly hair
up the
hooked up
winding
to
drive
breathing
of the
tubes in
Sterling
a
estate.
hospital bed.
The gates
They'd
alone
kill my
cost more
daughter.
than his annual
Liam
revenue.
said, Sophie,
They swung
she
open
needs
the
silently,
surgery that cost
guided by a
200
camera
grand
that had likely scanned
That's
his
why
retina,
I'm here.
his
I'm
license
invisible,
plate,
and his
I make
credit score before he
$15 an
even
hour
stopped.
and I stay alive for her.
The house wasn't a home.
So,
it was a
please give me
fortress
my
of glass
jacket
and
back
steel,
and let me go
perched
back
on
to
a
work.
cliff overlooking Puget
Forget
Sound.
you heard me.
It was
Victoria
beautiful,
stared at the
cold,
photo
and
of the sick
imposing,
child.
just like
Then
Victoria.
she looked at the man who had
A
tried
butler,
to save
a
her
man
father's
named
life.
Elias, with posture
She thought
so
of the
straight
mold
it
in
looked
her company,
painful, met
the
him at the
leaked
massive oak
crisis,
doors.
the threats.
It was all
Mr.
connected.
Ross,
Whoever
you were
killed her
expected.
father was still
Please
trying
follow
to
me.
destroy his
Elias
legacy.
didn't lead
No,
him to a study
Victoria
or living
said.
room.
Liam looked
He
at
led
her
him
weary.
through the house,
No,
down a
I'm
long
not
hallway
firing
lined
you,
with
and I'm
abstract
not
art
letting
that
you
looked
go
like
back to
violent
moving
splashes
boxes
of paint,
and
into a
Victoria
private
straightened
elevator.
her spine. The
They
CEO
descended
masked
into
the
sliding
bowels
back
of the
into
estate.
place.
The doors
But
opened
this
to reveal
time,
a
there was
subterranean
fire behind
garage
it.
that was cleaner
You
than
were his
most
security.
hospitals.
You know who killed him.
The floor was polished.
I saw the car reflecting the LED black SUV. There were cars here that Caleb had only seen in magazines.
Victoria extended her hand.
P1,
promoted.
A vintage Rolls-Royce immediately.
A Lamborghini
Mayora. Promoted to
but
what?
The bay in the center was empty, save for a lump covered by a heavy canvas
personal
tarp.
bodyguard.
Victoria was standing there.
She had changed out of her power suit into a silk blouse and slacks, but she looked no less formidable.
Liam's mouth fell open.
Next to her stood a man who could only be Richard
Sterling.
You covered me when I was cold.
Richard was handsome in a way that money could buy.
And you tried to save the only man I ever loved.
Hair that was
now
perfectly
you're going
quafted.
to help me find
the
bastard
tumbler of amber liquid,
and we're going to
his
burn
eyes
them to
were
the ground.
already glassy.
Liam stared at her for a long
Richard
moment.
slurred slightly.
He saw the
swirling
fear in
his
her
drink.
eyes, but
This
also
is the night
steel.
in shining coveralls.
He nodded once.
Richard,
behave,
yes,
Mom.
Victoria
Call
said,
me
her
Victoria.
voice flat.
Now go
She
get
turned
cleaned
to
up.
Caleb.
We
You're
have a
late.
board meeting
I'm
in
on
an
time.
hour, and
Your
I have a
clear
feeling the
throat
killer
cake
is
took
sitting
5
at the
minutes
table.
to open.
Caleb
The transformation
replied,
of Liam
Bennett was a
elevated.
violent affair.
He didn't extend
a
a hand to
montage of
Richard.
trying on clothes.
He sensed the man was
It
the
a
type who
strategic
washed his
rearming.
hands after touching
Victoria
the
had her personal
Let's
tailor
cut to
open
the
his
chase.
shop an hour before
Richard
the board
sneered,
meeting.
stepping forward.
Liam stood on
He
a
smelled of
podium,
expensive
arms
scotch and
outstretched,
aggression.
as an elderly
My wife
Italian
thinks you're
man
some
with a
kind of
measuring tape
savant.
tutted over
I think
his
you're a
scarred
grifter who
knuckles
got
and
lucky
calloused
with a
palms.
flat tire.
He is built
But
like a
since
brick.
Victoria
How you
holds the
say,
purse strings to the
underscore,
charity
underscore
projects,
house,
you're here.
Miss Sterling,
The
show
tour
him
muttered,
the car.
pinning fabric
Victoria
around Liam's
interrupted,
broad chest,
her eyes warning Richard to
Nothing
stop.
off the rack will fit
She
these
walked
shoulders.
over to the covered lump
Victoria
and pulled the
sat
canvas
on a
back.
plush velvet sofa
Caleb's
sipping
breath
espresso.
hitched. Her eyes
It
never
was,
leaving
or
Liam.
had been, a
In his
1957
t-shirt,
Mercedes-Benz
he was invisible.
300
But
SL
as
Roadster,
the tour draped a
convertible,
charcoal
silver,
wool suit
one of
jacket
the
over
most
him,
beautiful
something
cars ever
shifted.
made.
The rough
But this
edges
one was a
didn't
corpse.
disappear.
The
They
front
were
end
just
was
encased
crumpled
in
like an
armor.
accordion.
He looked
The windshield
devastated.
was shattered.
A weapon in
The
silk
passenger
lining.
door was caved
Clear's
in.
throat, it's
the
too
leather
tight.
interior
Liam
was torn
grumbled,
and stained
tugging
with
at the
something
collar of
dark
the
that had
crisp white
dried a
shirt.
long time ago.
I feel like I'm being
Jesus,
choked by a
Caleb
napkin.
whispered,
Get
his
used to
mechanics
it,
instinct
Victoria
taking over.
said,
He
setting down
walked
her
around
cup.
the wreck, running
That
a hand
feeling
over
is
the
called
twisted
corporate
metal.
life.
You
Frame
aren't a
damage.
janitor anymore.
Suspension is
Liam.
shot.
You're my
Engine
shadow,
block might
and my
be cracked.
shadow doesn't wear
What
Dickies.
happened to this thing?
When he stepped
The
off the
silence
podium,
in the garage
fully
became
dressed in the
suffocating.
bespoke suit,
Richard
even
took
Sarah,
a long
who
drink,
had arrived
his
with
eyes
updated
narrowing.
portfolios.
An accident,
Stopped dead in her
Victoria
tracks.
said.
Her voice
The man
unusually
looked like
quiet.
he owned the building,
12 years
not
ago.
like he mopped
12
it.
years.
The shoes
Caleb
pinched.
looked up.
Liam said,
You've kept a
looking
wrecked
miserably
classic
at
in
the
a climate-controlled
Oxfords.
basement for 12
They
years
cost
without touching it.
$1,200.
I want it
Victoria
restored,
said dryly.
Victoria said,
They're supposed
ignoring
to
his
pinch.
question.
It keeps
To
you
factory
alert.
condition.
Let's go.
I want it
The
to look
lions
like
are
it
waiting.
did the day it
The
rolled off
boardroom
the
on
line.
the 50th floor was
I
an
want the
expensive
engine to glass
purr.
and cold
I
steel.
want the memory of the crash
The 12
erased.
members of the
It's a
board were
total
already
loss.
seated
Miss
around the oval table
Sterling,
when Victoria
Caleb
said
entered.
honestly.
The air
To
was
fix
thick
this,
with the scent
you'd
of
have to
expensive
rebuild
cologne
it from
and
the ground up.
treachery.
Parts
Victoria
for a
took her
57
seat
SL
at the
are
head of the
impossible
table.
to find.
Liam didn't
You're looking
sit.
at 6
He
months
stood
of work
behind her
minimum,
chair to the
maybe
right,
a year.
hands clasped in
I don't
front of
care
him,
how long
his blue
it
eyes
takes,
scanning the room
Victoria
like a
said
turret.
intensely.
He
And
saw
I
the
don't
sudden
care what it
stiffening of
costs.
postures.
I have sourced
He
a
saw the
warehouse
quick,
of parts in
nervous
Germany.
glances darting
They
toward
arrive
him.
next week.
Good morning.
You will work
Victoria
here every
began,
night,
6
voice
p.m.
ice
to
cold.
midnight. Before we
You keep
discuss
your
the
garage during the
merger,
day,
I'd
but your
like
nights
to
belong
introduce
to
Liam
me.
Bennett.
Why this
He
car?
is taking over
Caleb
as head of
asked.
my personal
You could buy
security
10 pristine
detail,
ones for
effective
what this
immediately.
restoration will cost
Given
because
the
this one
recent
is mine.
leaks, I felt it necessary to
then
tighten the
softer.
perimeter.
It's the only thing
A
I have
heavy
left
silence
before.
fell.
Simon
Don't touch
Draxler,
it.
Richard
The
suddenly
CFO,
barked.
leaned forward.
He slammed his glass
Simon
down
was
on a
45,
workbench,
slick
with
with
hair
Victoria,
gelled so
this
tight
is
it looked
insanity.
like a helmet.
That car is cursed.
He had been Arthur
It killed
Sterling's
Richard.
protege.
Victoria's
The
shout
man everyone
echoed off the
assumed would
concrete
take
walls.
over until Arthur
It was a
gave it
primal
all to
sound
his
filled with a
20-something
mixture
daughter.
of rage and panic.
His resentment
Get
was a
out.
living thing
Go
in the room.
upstairs.
Security.
Richard glared at
Simon
Caleb,
sneered,
a look of
his
pure,
eyes flicking
unadulterated
up to Liam.
hatred.
Victoria, you
Darling,
fix this car.
isn't this a
Grease
bit
monkey,
melodramatic?
and you'll regret
We're
it.
a logistics firm,
Some things
not
are
the
broken
Pentagon.
for a reason.
And where did
Clear
you find
throat
this
gentleman
gentleman?
towards the elevator?
His face isn't familiar.
When
in
the doors
circuit.
closed,
Liam's
Victoria
eyes
let
locked
out a
onto
breath
Simon.
she seemed to have
He
been
didn't
holding for a
blink.
decade.
In the basement,
She
Liam
leaned
had learned
against
to
the
read men
pristine
by how they
fender
held
of
the
the McLarens,
McLarens.
looking suddenly
Here
fragile.
he read them by how they held
The
their
job
pens.
pays $50,000
Simon was
a
gripping
month,
his Mont
she
Blanc
said to
so
the floor.
tightly his knuckles were white.
Plus a bonus upon
Where I
completion.
found him is irrelevant.
That clears
Simon.
your debt in 2 months.
Victoria said,
Caleb,
what is
it
relevant
secures
is the
Sophie's
Oak Haven
future.
bid. other. Caleb looked at the wrecked car, this morning, then at the woman who was clearly as broken as the machine. Sterling leadership. He saw the final notice bills on his counter. Can you blame them? Simon said, Sophie wearing hand-me-down shoes. Victoria, half up since front, your father Caleb passed, the stock has fluctuated wildly. I work for you.
You're firing executives
down
left
here while
and right.
I'm working.
Now you bring a thug into the
Victoria
boardroom.
looked up.
It
Her
looks
steel
desperate.
mask sliding
What
back
looks
into
desperate?
place.
Simon.
Agree.
Victoria
Elias will
retorted,
write the check.
leaning forward.
One question.
Is someone
Caleb
feeding our
said,
proprietary
pointing at the
data
dark
to
stain on the
competitors
leather
to
seat.
artificially tank the
Is
stock
that
price
blood?
so they can buy
Victoria
a controlling
turned
stake
away,
when it bottoms
walking
out?
toward the shadows.
Simon
Just
flinched.
fix the car.
It was microscopic.
Caleb.
A slight
Please.
twitch of the
3
left
weeks
eye.
later,
But
Caleb
Liam
was
saw
exhausted.
it. That's a
But for the
serious
first time in
accusation.
years,
Another
he wasn't
board
stressed
member,
about
an
money.
old ally of Arthur
The
named
check had
Robert
cleared.
Croft, said
The bank
nervously.
lien was gone.
Do you
He
have
had even
proof?
bought Sophie
I'm working
a new
on
bicycle,
it, Victoria
purple,
said.
with streamers.
And when I find it,
But the
falling
Sterling
out
estate
won't
was
just be
draining him in a
corporate.
different way.
It will be
Every
criminal.
night at
The
6
meeting
p.m. he
dissolved
scanned
into
his
shouting.
badge at the gate.
Victoria held her
He
ground,
changed into
parrying
fresh
their
coveralls
attacks
in
with
the
data
estate
and
garage
cold
and
fury.
went to war with the Mercedes.
Throughout it all,
It
Liam
was slow,
didn't move a
grueling
muscle.
work.
He just
He had
watched
stripped the
Simon
car
Draxler
down to
he
the
watched
chassis.
the sweat bead
He
on
was
Simon's
straightening the
upper
frame
lip.
millimeter
He
by
watched the way
millimeter.
Simon
It
kept
was
checking
quiet,
his phone
lonely
under the
work
table.
until Chloe started
When the
showing
room
up.
finally
It started
cleared,
small,
leaving
she
only
would come
Victoria
down
and
ostensibly
Liam.
to
She
get a
slumped
soda from
slightly
the
in her
garage
chair.
fridge.
The armor
Then she
cracked
started
for a second.
lingering,
Well,
sitting on a
she
stool,
sighed,
doing
that
homework,
went about as
watching
well
him
as
well.
expected.
She
Liam
was
walked
alone
around the
kid.
table to where
Caleb
Simon
recognized
recognized
the
the
signs.
He picked
She
up
had
a
everything
notepad
money
Simon
could
left
buy,
behind.
but her house
There
was a
were no
war zone
notes,
of silence
just
and
aggressive
passive
doodles
aggression.
of jagged lines.
You're doing it
It's
wrong,
him,
Liam
she
said one
quietly.
Tuesday night.
Victoria
Pointing at
looked
his
up.
math when he
Simon,
was calculating
he's
the
slimy.
fuel-air mixture
Yes,
ratio.
and he hates that I
Caleb
inherited
looked
the
up,
company,
wiping
but he
grease
adored
from
my
his
father.
nose.
Excuse
He wouldn't
me,
have. He
I've
didn't
been
adore your
fixing
father
cars
since
Victoria.
before you were born.
He feared him.
Yeah,
Liam
but that's
clears
basic
throat
algebra.
corrected. Chloe's
voice
voice
dropped to that
hopping
low
off her
rumble that
stool.
always made
You
her skin
forgot to
prickle.
carry the variable.
When you
She
mentioned the
grabbed
stock
his
price
notepad
tanking,
and scribbled
his
a
heart rate
correction.
jumped through the roof.
Caleb checked it.
I could
She
see
was
the
right.
vein in his
Okay,
neck pulsing,
Einstein,
and he checked
Caleb
his phone
grinned.
3 times
You
when
act
you brought
smart,
up the
but
leaks.
can you hand me a 10
He was
millimeter
waiting for
socket without
instructions.
asking what it looks
Instructions
like?
from whom?
Try
That's
me.
what we need
Within
to
a
find
week,
out.
Chloe was
He's
his
not the
unofficial
mastermind.
apprentice.
He's too
She
jumpy.
wasn't afraid
He's
of
the
the
middleman.
grease.
Liam
In
looked
fact,
at her.
she seemed
His blue eyes
blue-eyed.
intense.
It was the
You
only
were right
time
about
she
the
looked
trap
relaxed
last
when
night.
she had oil
Someone
on her
was
hands
coming.
and was helping
Simon
Caleb
was
sand down
probably
a rusted
texting them to
fender.
abort because you were
They
there.
talked about everything.
Victoria stood up,
School,
walking
boys,
over to
the way
window.
Richard ignored her,
The city
the way
looked
her mother
different
seemed
now.
to look through her.
It wasn't just a
She
chessboard
loves
anymore.
you know.
It was a
Caleb
battlefield.
said one night,
If it's
struggling
Simon,
with a
she
rusted
whispered.
bolt.
He has access
Your mom,
to everything.
she loves her
My
reputation.
schedule,
Chloe
my
muttered,
transport
scrubbing
routes,
a spark
the security
plug.
protocols for
She
the
loves
building.
her company.
Which
She
means,
looks at me and
Liam
sees,
said,
I don't
stepping
know,
up beside
a
her.
mistake.
His presence a
She
solid
looks at
wall
you
and
and
heat
sees
against
herself.
her side.
Caleb corrected.
Nowhere
And
is safe
she's
for
scared
you.
she's going to
Not
mess you
anymore.
up.
He
How
looked
do you
down
know?
at her.
Because
The
I look at
proximity
Sophie
was
and I'm
dizzying.
terrified
For the
every day
first
that
time
I'm
all
not
day,
enough to be
she
both a
wasn't
mom
the
and a
CEO.
dad.
She
Parents
was
are
just
just
the woman
people.
he had covered
Chloe,
with a jacket.
we're mostly
I need to
faking
pick
it.
up Sophie,
The elevator
he said
chimed.
softly.
Chloe froze.
The babysitter
eyes
has to
darting
leave
the
at
door.
3.
It
was
reality
Victoria.
crashed back
She was
in.
holding
Of
2
course,
glasses and
go.
a bottle of
No.
very expensive
Liam shook
Japanese
his
whiskey.
head.
You're coming with me.
She froze when
Like
she
I
saw
said,
Chloe in a
nowhere is
pair of
safe.
oversized
You stay
coveralls
within
holding a
3
wire
feet of
brush.
me until we know what
Chloe,
Simon is planning.
Victoria asked bewildered.
Victoria opened
What
her
are you
mouth
doing?
to argue,
Helping.
to assert her
Chloe said
independence, but the
defensively,
memory of the
stepping
cold terror
back.
she felt
I was
last
just
night
going.
stopped her.
Stay.
Caleb
She
said
nodded.
firmly.
All right, she's
Let's
actually
go get your
helping.
daughter.
She's
Liam
got better
drove
hands for the
Victoria's
small
armored
wiring than I
Mercedes
do.
SUV.
Victoria
It
looked
felt
from
like
the
driving
mechanic
a
to her
tank
daughter.
compared to his
She
rusted
saw
out
the smudge
sedan.
of dirt on Chloe's
They
cheek.
left the gleaming
She
steel
saw the
canyons
smile
of the
that was
financial
fading from
district
Chloe's
and headed
face.
toward a part of the
I
city
brought a
Victoria
drink.
rarely
Victoria
saw
said,
neighborhoods
her
of
voice
cramped apartment buildings and faded
uncharacteristically for the
storefronts.
mechanic.
He
But
pulled
I
up to a
suppose
small
I'll give you
peeling
my
duplex.
homework. Chloe
Stay
mumbled,
in the car,
rushing past
he
her
ordered.
mother to the
The
elevator.
bodyguard toned back
The
in
doors
place.
closed,
He
leaving
returned
Caleb
5
and
minutes
Victoria
later
alone.
carrying a bundle
The
wrapped
tension
in
in
a
the
pink
room
blanket.
shifted from familial to
He
something
buckled her
heavier,
into a car
hotter.
seat in the back.
Victoria walked over
turned
and
around.
placed the glasses
Sophie
on the
was
workbench
fine,
right
but she
next
looked
to a
free.
disassembled
She was
carburetor.
tiny, pale,
She
with
poured.
dark circles
You have my
under eyes that were closed in exhausted sleep.
Victoria said,
her breath rattled slightly in her chest.
She's good at it.
There was a small plastic tube taped to her nose connected to a portable oxygen concentrator Liam placed on the floorboard.
Wincing as the amber
Victoria
liquid
felt a physical ache in her chest.
This was the reality Liam lived every day.
The reason
everything I say sounds like a board meeting directive.
She's beautiful.
Stop
Liam,
trying to
Victoria
manage her.
whispered.
Caleb said,
Liam looked in the rearview mirror, his eyes softening with a love so fierce it hurt to witness.
Just be with her.
Like this.
She's having a bad day.
We stripped it down to the metal.
We find the broken parts
before I take her
home.
We
replace them.
The trip to the hospital was silent.
The metal has to
watched
set.
Liam.
Victoria
looked
looked
at
at
him.
shoulders.
The way his knuckles turned white on the steering wheel every time Sophie
silver
coughed.
in his beard.
The kindness in his tired
was
eyes.
a chaotic assault of bright
She felt
colors,
a crack in
trying
the
to
ice
mask the
fortress
set
she
she
had
had built
built
around her heart. This
Liam
car,
moved through
she
it with
said,
practiced
running
ease,
a finger
nodding
along
to nurses who
the
clearly
smooth,
adored
newly
him.
primed
Clear
fender.
throat.
Hey,
it was
Papa
the car
Bear,
my first
an older
husband
nurse.
died in. Chloe's
Brenda
father
said,
Caleb
taking
went
Sophie
still.
from him gently.
The pieces clicked,
Rough night.
the blood on the
Breathing
seat,
is shallow.
the 12 years
Brenda.
of storage,
The
the hatred
hatred
Richard
had for the
ATs were
machine.
dropping into the high 80s
I was
this
driving,
morning.
Victoria confessed.
Liam's voice
the
was
words
tight,
tumbling
clinical,
out.
a
We
stark
were arguing.
contrast to the
It was
growling
raining
warmth
just
he
like
used
the
with
night you
Victoria.
helped Chloe.
While
I
the
lost
doctors
control.
examined
We
Sophie
hit a tree.
behind a curtain,
He died
Liam
instantly.
stood in the
I
hallway,
walked away
staring
without
at a
scratch.
mural of cartoon
She
animals.
looked up at Caleb.
He
Tears
looked
brimming
like he
in
was
his vibrating
vibrating
with
eyes.
restrained energy.
Richard hates
Victoria
this car
walked
because
up
it
beside
reminds
him.
him he's the
She
replacement.
didn't know what to
He
do with
hates
her
Chloe
hands.
because she
She
looks
was
like
used
him.
to fixing
And
things
I
with money
wanted
or
to
commands.
fix it because I
This
thought
was
maybe if I
unbreakable.
put the car
The
back
surgery,
together,
Victoria
I could put
said
myself
quietly.
back together.
The offer still
She
stands.
was trembling.
Liam, without
I wired
thinking,
the funds
Caleb
to the
set his
hospital's
drink
account
down.
this morning
He
under an
stepped
anonymous
forward and
donor
wrapped his
trust.
arms around her.
They can
It
schedule
wasn't
a
a
romantic
romantic
she's
embrace.
stable.
Not
Liam
at
whipped
first.
his head
It was
around.
the way he held
stared
Sophie
at
when
her,
she had
his
a
jaw
nightmare.
working.
He
He
looked
held
like
her
he
tight,
might cry or
letting her
punch the
fall
wall apart against
Victoria,
his chest.
that's I don't know
She
how to
smelled
don't.
of Chanel No.
She cut
5
him
in
off.
sorrow.
My father
Victoria
used to say,
stiffened for a
money
second,
is
then
useless
melted.
unless it's moving
She
things.
buried her face in his
Let it
greasy
move
coveralls
this.
and sobbed.
He looked at her,
Great heaving
really
sobs
looked at
that
her,
echoed in the
past the
silent
expensive
garage.
haircut and the
Caleb
designer
stroked
clothes.
her hair. His
He
rough
saw
hand
the
gentle
lonely
against
little
the
girl
sleek
whose
blonde
father
bob.
had died,
It
trying to
wasn't
save
your
another
fault,
father
Vic.
from the same
It
fate.
wasn't your fault.
Thank
They
you.
stood there
He
for a
choked
long
out.
time.
He
When
reached
she
out,
finally
his hand
pulled
hovering,
back,
then
her
gently
mascara
covered
was
hers
smeared,
on the
her
railing.
eyes red. His palm
She
was
looked
rough,
beautiful,
warm, and
she looked
overwhelmingly
up and
real.
the air changed.
A current of
The grief
electricity
morphed
shot
into a
up her
desperate
arm,
need for
shocking
connection.
in its intensity.
Her gaze dropped to his
They
lips.
stood there for a
Caleb,
moment, connected
she
by the
breathed.
railing
She
and a
leaned
shared
in.
secret,
Caleb
surrounded
didn't
by the
pull
beeping
away.
of monitors.
He leaned down,
his heart
Mr.
hammering
Bennett,
against his
a
ribs
doctor
like a
approached.
piston.
She's
Their
stable.
lips were an
We
inch
adjusted
apart
her
when the
meds.
sound of a
You
slow,
can take her
sarcastic
home, but
clap
clear
echoed
throat
from the
keep the
balcony
oxygen
above.
on tonight.
Clap, clap,
As they
clap.
walked back
They
to the
sprang
car,
apart.
Liam,
Richard
carrying
was
a
standing
sleeping
on the
Sophie,
steel
his
mezzanine
phone
that overlooked
buzzed.
the workshop.
He shifted
was leaning
Sophie
over
to
the
one
railing,
arm and
a
answered,
cruel twisted
"Yeah,
smile
wait,
on his
slow
face.
down."
He
Who
held
is
the phone
this?
in his
Liam
hand.
stopped
the camera
walking
lens
in the middle
pointed
of the
directly
parking
at
garage.
them. His face
Bravo.
went stone
Richard
cold.
called down.
The tenderness
His voice
from the
dripping
ward
with
evaporated,
malice.
replaced
The
by the
grieving
danger
widow
and
and
the
stillness
hired help.
Victoria had
It's
seen in the
almost
basement.
poetic. Or it would
You're
be
sure?
if it wasn't
Okay,
so pathetic.
IOUS.
Victoria wiped
Yeah,
her face.
I'm on
the
my
ice
way.
returning instantly.
He hung up and looked
Richard,
at Victoria.
go to bed.
The blue eyes
Oh,
were glacial.
I'm going.
That was
Richard
an old
laughed,
contact,
waving the
a
phone.
mechanic who used
But
to
I
do
think
work
the board
for
of
the people your
directors
father
might
got
find this
mixed up
video
with.
very interesting.
He said,
A black
CEO
SUV
mentally
matching the
unstable
description I
DNCs
gave
with
mechanic
mechanic
while
while
obsessing
this
over
morning.
dead husband's death
Smashed
car.
front bumper like
That's
it
a
hit something
headline.
hard.
Victoria.
Victoria's
That's a
breath
stock
hitched.
dropper.
My father's
He turned
car.
and walked away.
No, too
Caleb
recent.
took a
He
step
thinks
toward
they
the
hit
stairs,
something last
his
night.
fists clenched.
Liam's eyes
I'm going
darkened.
to kill him.
He said the driver
Victoria
was frantic.
grabbed his arm.
Said they
Her
missed
grip
the
was
target
iron.
at Sterling
No,
Tower and
she
needed
said,
the damage
her eyes
fixed
hard and
before the
dry.
boss saw it.
He wants you to hit him.
Victoria
he
felt
wants
sick.
a lawsuit.
They had
He
been there
wants
last
to destroy
night.
you.
If she
So,
hadn't
what
pretended
do we
to
do?
sleep, if
Caleb
Liam hadn't
asked,
walked in,
adrenaline coursing
where is
through
the
him.
car now?
Victoria looked at the
asked,
disassembled
her voice
Mercedes,
trembling.
then at the
It's at a
elevator where
scrapyard
Richard
down
had
by the
disappeared.
docks. Said
We
they're
finished
moving
the
it
car.
tonight to be
She
crushed
said
to destroy
coldly,
the
and then
evidence.
I destroy him.
Liam
Clear
looked down
throat,
at
but as
sleeping
Caleb
Sophie,
watched her,
then at
he
Victoria.
saw the tremor in her hands.
He was torn between his two
Richard had
duties.
the ammunition
We have
now,
to go,
and in the world of
Victoria said
billionaires,
firmly.
information
We
was a
need
weapon
proof.
far
I
deadlier
can't
than a
take
lug
Sophie
wrench.
there.
It's
For
dangerous.
the next week,
The
we'll drop
silence
her
in
at
my
my
Sterling
penthouse.
garage was deafening.
Sarah is there.
Caleb
She can
and
watch
Victoria
her.
worked
My
in a
building is a
synchronized,
fortress.
terrified orbit.
Victoria
They
took
didn't
charge.
speak about
Then
the
we
near
go to the
kiss.
docks.
They didn't
Liam
speak about
hesitated,
Richard's threat.
then nodded.
They
Clear
just
throat,
worked.
okay.
The
But
1957
Victoria,
Mercedes
if we
was
find
no
this
longer
car,
a wreck.
there's no
It was
turning back.
becoming a masterpiece.
We are declaring
the silver
war.
paint,
Good.
a custom
Victoria
mix Caleb
said,
had
her
spent
eyes
3
hard as
days
diamonds.
perfecting.
Looked
I've
like
been
liquid
waiting 2
mercury
years
under
to
the
fire the
lights.
first shot.
The
The
engine,
scrapyard at
rebuilt with
midnight
parts
looked like a
shipped from a
graveyard
dusty
for
warehouse
giants.
in Stuttgart was
Skeletal
ready to
towers
fire.
of crushed metal
But
loomed
the air
against the
felt
indigo
heavy,
sky,
like the drop
the
in
air
pressure
tasted
before
of iron oxide and oil.
hurricane.
They
It
parked
broke
the
on on a Friday half a mile away and
Caleb
walked in.
was at his own
Liam
shop.
had changed back
Auto
into
repair.
his work boots
He
and
was
dark
changing the
clothes,
oil on a
giving
sedan,
Victoria
whistling
a
a
dark-hooded
tune,
jacket
thinking
to
about the
cover her
weekend.
blonde hair.
He
Planned to take Sophie to the aquarium with
his
the
voice
extra
barely
money he'd
audible
saved.
over the distant clang
He
of a
heard
crusher
tires
working
screech
late.
outside.
Not
Step
one
where I
car,
step.
many.
Don't touch
Police
anything
search
sharp.
warrant.
He moved
Nobody
with a predatory
moved.
grace.
The shout was
sliding
followed by the
between
crash of
stacks
his
of
office
rusted
door
cars,
being kicked in.
weaponless but entirely
Caleb
lethal.
slid out from under the
Victoria
lift, wiping
followed,
his
her
hands,
heart hammering against her ribs.
Whoa,
This was
officer.
worlds away from
What's this
boardrooms
about?
and stock
Four
tickers.
uniformed
This was
officers
visceral
and two
reality.
detectives in cheap
They found
suits
S's
swarmed a
garage
small
at the back
bay.
of the lot. A
One of the
corrugated metal
detectives,
shack
a
with
man
light
with a
spilling
face
from
like
under
a
the door,
bulldog, shoved a piece of
Liam
paper
motioned
in
for her
Caleb's
to wait
chest.
behind a stack of tires.
Caleb Ross,
He
you're
approached
under
the door
arrest.
and knocked in a
Arrest for
specific
what?
rhythm.
Caleb
3
stammered
taps,
as they
pause,
spun him
2
around,
taps.
slamming
The
his
door
face
creaked
against the
open.
cold metal
A
of
short,
the lift.
greasy man with
The
a nervous
handcuffs
tick
bit
peered
into
out.
his wrists.
Liam,
Grand
Jesus,
larceny
man,
receiving
you
stolen
shouldn't have
property.
come. Where's the
Corporate
SUV?
espionage.
The detective listed off, patting him down.
They came early.
We got
Took
a
it to
tip.
the main
You've
crusher
been
pit about 20 minutes
ago.
ago.
Dynamics
S
private
wiped
collection.
sweat from his forehead
That's
with a
insanity.
blackened hand.
Caleb yelled.
These guys,
struggling.
they aren't
I work
local
for
muscle.
Liam
Sterling.
They're pros.
She hired me.
Russian,
Yeah,
maybe.
well,
I don't
she
know.
didn't hire you
They
to stash
spooked
a
me.
$50,000
Did you get anything
fuel
off it?
injection
A
system
VIN
in your
number.
locker.
Anything inside.
Another officer
S
emerged
hesitated,
from the back
looking
office
over his
holding a
shoulder.
plastic bag.
Look, I don't
Inside
want
was
no
a gleaming
trouble.
chrome fuel
Liam
pump,
stepped
vintage
closer,
Mercedes
looming
Benz.
over the smaller man.
Caleb stared at
The
it.
trouble is
I've
I've
never
never
seen
seen
that before in my life.
They killed Arthur
That belongs
Sterling,
on the
and
car
they tried
I'm
to kill
restoring.
his daughter last
Save
night.
it for the judge.
S's
Grease
eyes
monkey.
widened.
They
He
dragged
fumbled
him
in
out.
his greasy
The neighborhood
overalls
was
pocket
watching.
and pulled out a small
Mrs.
charred object.
Gable was on her porch.
It was a
hand
crumpled
over her
parking
mouth.
ticket.
Found
Sophie
this
jammed
wasn't
under
there.
the passenger
Thank God
seat.
she was at school.
Looks like they
But
tried
the
to
shame
burn
burned
the
Caleb
contents
hotter
of the
than
glove
any welding
box, but
torch.
this survived.
As they shoved him into the
Liam
back
took
of the
it.
cruiser,
It was barely
Caleb saw a
legible,
familiar
stained
black
with oil
Escalade
and cinched
parked
at the
down the
edges.
street.
Valet
The window
parking
rolled down
receipt.
just an
The Pierre
inch.
Hotel,
Richard
NYC.
Sterling's face appeared,
Date yesterday.
smiling.
Time
He
stamped
raised a hand in a mock
7:45
salute
p.m.
as the siren
Clears
wailed,
throat. Liam
drowning
stared
out
at it.
Caleb's scream of
Then the
innocence.
Pierre, that's
In
across
the holding
country.
cell, time
Private
lost its
jet.
meaning.
Victoria
It smelled of
whispered from
bleach and
behind the
despair.
tires.
Caleb
She
sat
stepped
on the
into
metal
the light,
bench,
unable
head in
to
his
stay
hands.
hidden.
They had
were at the Pierre
confiscated
at
his phone.
7:45
He couldn't
Eastern
call
Standard
Victoria.
Time and in
He
Seattle
couldn't
by
call
9
Mrs.
o'clock Pacific
Gable to
Standard
pick up
Time.
Sophie.
They flew private.
Sophie.
The
The
thought
looked
paralyzed
Victoria,
him,
his
clear
jaw
his throat.
dropping. If he didn't
Holy
get out by 3 p.m.,
Child
Child
Protective
Protective
Services
Services
would
would
be
be
called. Liam said,
Richard
grabbing
knew that this
Victoria's
wasn't
arm.
just about
Thanks,
the job.
S.
This was
Lose
an
this
execution
number.
of his life.
As they turned to leave,
Across town in the
floodlights
gleaming
suddenly
glass
bathed the
tower
yard
of
in
Sterling
blinding
white
white
light.
light.
Victoria was in the
Tires
middle of a
screeched on
board meeting
gravel.
when her phone
Hey,
buzzed.
a voice shouted from
A
behind
text
the
from
blinding
Richard.
lights.
Check the news.
Two silhouettes
Your
stepped
boy is
out
in
of a car,
chains.
blocking
Resign
the
as
exit.
CEO
They
by
were
5
holding
or
things
p.m.
that
Or I
looked
release the
terrifyingly
video
like
of you two and I
crowbars.
testify
Go.
that you were his
Liam
accomplice
growled,
in the theft.
shoving Victoria
I'll
toward a
take
gap
the
in the
company,
fence.
the house,
Run
and
back
full
to the
custody
car.
of Chloe.
Lock the doors.
Victoria
Don't
opened them
open
for
pale.
anyone
She
but me.
stood up abruptly,
I'm not leaving
knocking
you.
her chair over.
Victoria,
Go.
meeting adjourned.
I can't
She
fight them if
announced,
I'm worrying
her voice
about
trembling
you.
with a rage
He
she
didn't
could
wait for
barely
an answer.
contain.
He sprinted
She ran
toward
to
the
her
lights,
office,
drawing
dialing
their
her
attention.
legal team.
Victoria
Get Caleb
watched in
Ross
horror
out
as
now.
the two men
I
swung
don't
at
care
him.
what the bail
Liam
is.
ducked under a
I don't
crowbar
care who the
swing,
judge is.
moving with shocking
By the
speed.
courthouse if you
He
have
slammed
to.
his shoulder
M.
into the first
Sterling,
attacker's
her
chest,
lawyer said,
sending him
voice
sprawling
grave.
into a pile
We
of
can't.
scrap metal.
The DA is pushing
The
for
second
no
man
bail.
swung low,
They're claiming
aiming for
flight
Liam's
risk.
knees.
And Richard
Liam
has
jumped,
submitted an
rolled over
affidavit
the hood
claiming
of a
you were
rusted
unaware
sedan
of the
and
theft,
came up with a
positioning
piece of
himself
lead
as the
pipe in his hand.
whistleblower.
It was
If you
brutal,
intervene now,
fast,
it
and
looks
ugly.
like obstruction.
It wasn't
It
cinema
looks like you're
violence.
covering for
it
your
was
lover.
desperate.
Victoria
threw
threw the
and
phone
ran.
against the
She
wall.
scrambled through
It
the gap
shattered.
in the fence,
She sank
tearing
into her
leather
jacket,
chair,
gasping for
staring
air.
at the view of the city
She
she
reached
owned,
the Mercedes,
feeling utterly
fumbling
powerless.
with the fob.
Richard
Terrified
had
the men were
checkmated
right
her.
behind
If
her.
she helped
She
Caleb,
threw herself
she
inside
confirmed
and locked and lost her
doors.
company
Her
and
hands
the power
shaking
to
so
protect him
violently
long
she
term.
couldn't hold the phone to
If she
dial
did nothing,
911.
Caleb went to
10
prison.
agonizing minutes
and she
later,
lost the
a
only
shadow
man
fell
who
over
had
the
made her
driver's
feel
side
human
window.
in a decade.
She
The
screamed.
door to her
It was
office
Liam.
creaked open.
He was limping
Victoria
slightly.
looked up,
His lip was
expecting
split,
her
blood
assistant.
running down
It
his
was
chin,
Chloe,
and his
the
knuckles
teenager
were raw.
looked different,
But
she wasn't
his
wearing
eyes
her
were
usual
clear.
oversized
He unlocked
hoodie.
the door and
She
slid
was wearing
into
a
the driver's
blazer
seat,
she'd stolen
wincing
from
as he pulled the
Victoria's
door
closet,
shut.
and her eyes were
"Are you
burning with
okay?"
a fierce
She
intelligence.
cried, reaching out to
He
touch
didn't
his
do it,
bleeding
Chloe
lip.
said.
He flinched
I know,
away slightly,
Victoria
then
whispered,
leaned into her
but I
touch
can't
just for a
prove it.
second.
Richard.
He was
Richard
breathing
planned
hard,
this perfectly.
the adrenaline crashing.
Richard is an idiot.
"I'm fine,"
Chloe said
"They won't
flatly.
be following us."
She walked over to
He put the
Victoria's
car in
desk
gear
and placed
peeled
a
away from the
laptop on
docks.
it. The
He
tickets
thinks
because
Victoria
he pays for
said,
the
her
security
voice shaking.
system. He
What
controls
does it
it.
mean?
Liam
But he
wiped the
forgot
blood
that
from
you
his
made me
mouth
take
with the
those
back of his
coding
hand.
classes
last summer.
He tossed the crumpled
Victoria
valet
sat
ticket onto
up.
her lap.
Chloe,
What
did
did
you
Simon
do?
Draxler
I
isn't
hacked
the
the House
boss.
network.
He
Chloe
wouldn't be
said,
meeting
typing
people at the
furiously.
Pierre.
Richard
old
wiped
money
the footage from the
territory.
garage cameras
That's
for
where the
last
Sterling
night.
Foundation
He thought that was
charity gala is being held this Saturday. But he didn't know about the cloud backup for the nanny cam he installed in the garage to spy like a physical blow. She hit enter. It's the biggest event of the year. Popped up. Everyone will be night vision footage. The board, the investor, Richard at 3 a.m. entering the garage. She looked at Liam, alone. Her face pale in the dashboard in a hooded sweatshirt. My father was killed right before the gala 2 years ago. Richard handed the man an envelope of major change and company direction that night. Planted in his locker. Liam checked the rear view tiny but his eyes grim, and called the cops at 900 this Saturday. Sharp. The leak, the failed hit in the office. Stared at the screen. It's all been leading up to her mouth. They want a public execution of the Sterling name. For the first time, Victoria straightened up. The fear was still there, but the ice was back harder than ever. I recovered it. Then Chloe said, to be there. Mom, both of us. You have to go get him. She looked at his bruised face at the man who had just bled for her. If we let Caleb rot in there, we're garbage. We're going to a party. She walked around the desk in New York City was a cathedral of old money, kissing her forehead fiercely. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars Victoria light onto a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. We're going to prison. The air smelled of expensive hive of activity, white lies, but it fell silent when Victoria Sterling walked in. Victoria Sterling stepped out of the limousine. She looked like a paparazzi cameras blinding her for a moment. Chloe was a step behind her. She wore a dress of midnight blue velvet, backless and severe. I want to see the captain. Every Victoria announced to the Ironworld CEO. Now, but the cameras weren't just clicking Victoria Sterling. They were frantic to capture the man helping her out of the car. Get the captain. Liam Bennett wore a tuxedo that cost more than he used to make in a year. The bulldog detective was like a second skin, accentuating the width of his shoulders and the dangerous coiled energy of his processing the paperwork. The bruises on his knuckles were hidden by gloves. We found the cut on his lip was visible, and you found a rugged imperfection that made him look less like a corporate drone and more like a bodyguard from a noir film. Chloe opened the laptop and pressed play. Stay close. The room went silent as they watched Richard Sterling commit a felony. The heat of his detective's face went from red to white. Head up, he looked at the captain who was glaring at him. Don't let them see you bleed. You got a tip from Richard Sterling, Victoria whispered back. The captain asked the detective quietly until he squeezed her waist. He said he had proof. A silent promise of protection. Clears throat. Inside the ballroom was a shark tank. And get a warrant for Richard Sterling. Caleb was sitting on the cot, her with staring at the concrete floor when the cell door buzzed and slid like a test. Liam stood a step behind her. I told you I want a lawyer. His blue eyes scanning the perimeter, tracking waiters, exits, and pockets. Victoria was standing there, framed by the harsh hallway light. His voice a low rumble behind her, peeking around the door. Simon Draxler was by the bar, Caleb pale and sweating despite the air conditioning. Vic, she was down in a scotch with a shaking hand. She didn't care about the cops toward him. She rushed into the cell and threw her arms around him. Liquid on his Caleb held her, burying his face in her neck. The smell of her perfume washing away the stench of the jail. Victoria smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I'm so sorry that I'm losing my mind, or that I know who signed the valet ticket for the black SUV. I have to get Sophie. Simon's glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor. Stepping forward with a shy smile. The sound was swallowed. I called her. I told her you were helping us with a car emergency. I didn't have a choice. Sophie is fine. Leaning in, eating his eyes darting around. Caleb looked at the teenager. Victoria, tears welling in his eyes. You called her. He knows you found the car. I used the number on the business card. Liam stepped forward, Chloe shrugged. Boxing Simon the one you gave me. Give us a name. Caleb let out a laugh that was half sob. Maybe you don't go to prison for accessory to murder. Chloe's shoulder. I can't. Thank Victoria, kid. A booming jovial voice cut through the tension. Victoria said, her eyes senior board member, Richard is still out there, given Victoria candy when she was a child. The man who has already gathering at the estate and wept. He's planning to announce his takeover of the company tonight. He looked distinguished. Caleb wiped his face. The grandfatherly figure was gone, replaced by a cold resolve. Robert said, as the car kissing her cheek. He asked, "You look stunning. It needs and this must be the famous Victoria said. Bennett, the police gave it back to us as evidence, but the engine is assessing. Before returning to a warm smile, Clear's throat. Caleb looked at his watch. Victoria said, it was 5 shoulders to relax. The gala started at 8 having a fascinating chat with Simon about loyalty. Caleb said. Robert chuckled, I can get it running in 2 hours. On Simon's shoulder. Caleb, you just got out of jail, as if burned. Victoria said. Simon is a bundle of nerves. You don't have to do this. Ignore him. He tried to take my daughter Victoria. From me. Caleb said, his voice low and dangerous. You need to be on stage. He tried to ruin my life. Arthur Sterling depends on it. I'm not going to let him stand on that stage and win. Liam said flatly. We're going to drive that car right down his throat. Tight expression. The scene at the Sterling estate was chaotic. This is the founders were set up on the lawn. Principals only. Waiters circulated with champagne. The elite of Seattle were whispering about the rumors of Caleb's arrest and Victoria's impending resignation. She saw the protest in his eyes. Richard Sterling stood at the podium in the center of the ballroom. The stage was the safest place. Brightly lit in front of 500 witnesses. Victoria wasn't here. It's okay. Caleb was in a cell. Victoria said. Perfection. I have the speech. Ladies and gentlemen. Simon. Richard don't began. Let him run. His voice booming over the speakers. Then nodded. Thank you for 5 seconds away. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of restoration. But Victoria walked to the unforeseen circumstances involving mismanagement. The room went silent. Victoria Sterling will not be joining us. Faces. The people who had worshipped her father and were now waiting for activities involving her staff. 2 years ago, it is with a heavy heart that I announce a restructuring of Sterling Dynamics. Through the speakers, steady and strong. A murmur went through the crowd. My father will be assuming the role of interim CEO effective immediately to restore faith in our legacy. She saw Liam in the wings. His eyes locked on her. Polite claps. But transparency is dangerous. She continued. It was a low, guttural growl. A mechanical roar that vibrated the crystal glasses on the microphone screeched. In the wings, the crowd turned toward the double doors at the back of the ballroom, which led to the terrace and the garage ramp. Not for a tray, but for something metallic. He knew that sound. At the same time, the sound of a beast waking up. Robert Croft step away from the VIP table. The 1957 Mercedes-Benz 300 Roadster didn't just enter. The realization hit Liam like a sledgehammer. It wasn't under the chandeliers.
Simon was the
silver bullet of
history.
It was Robert.
The engine who had authorized the symphony of German engineering and American grit.
Robert, who wanted the company to sell off its assets
like
to his private equity
in a
firm.
tuxedo. Victoria
had bought him on the way over.
He didn't run.
In the passenger seat sat Victoria.
He tackled the red dress just as the man raised
a suppressed pistol.
Caleb gunned the engine.
The gun went
driving
off.
the car slowly,
shattering a water pitcher
right
onto
the
podium
stage.
inches from Victoria's
He killed
head.
the ignition.
The
Chaos
silence
erupted.
was absolute.
Screams.
Victoria
People
stepped
dropped
out
into
of the
floor.
car.
Victoria
looked at the
froze,
crowd,
staring at the
she
shattered
walked up
glass.
the stairs to the stage.
Liam was on top of the gunman,
raining down
trembling
blows
Richard,
with a
and took
ferocity
the
that was
microphone
terrifying.
from his hand.
He knocked
Sorry,
the weapon
I'm late,
away,
she
then
said,
scrambled
her
up,
voice cool
his
and
tuxedo
amplified.
torn, blood on
I
his
was
shirt.
busy picking up my lead
Victoria,
mechanic from
he
a false
vaulted onto the
imprisonment.
stage,
grabbing
she
her and
pointed
shielding
to the
her body
massive
with his
screen
own.
behind the stage where
Move
Richard
back,
had
exit
projected
now,
his company
Robert.
logo.
Victoria gasped
Chloe,
as he
if
dragged
you
her
would,
off stage.
Victoria said.
He left.
The screen
I saw him
flickered.
leave.
The
I
logo
know.
disappeared.
Liam shoved
The
her through the
security
service
footage
doors
into
into
the
planting
kitchen.
the stolen
He gave
parts
the
played
signal.
for 300.
They burst into the hotel
of the city's
kitchen.
most startling
Powerful
chefs.
people.
Gasps
didn't
filled
stop.
the room.
He
Richard
kicked open
lunged
the
for
rear
the
loading
laptop
dock door.
connected to the projector.
The alleyway was
but
dark,
he was tackled,
rain slicking
not by
the cobblestones,
security, but by Caleb,
A black
who had
town car
vaulted
was
onto the
idling at
stage.
the end of the alley.
Caleb held Richard down.
Purring.
His mechanic's
Robert
grip
Croft
like
was
a vice.
climbing into the back
That's
seat.
for the car.
Croft.
Caleb whispered
Liam
in
bellowed.
Richard's ear.
Robert
In
froze.
this, he nodded
turned,
to the side of
looking
the
at the
stage.
disheveled pair.
The bulldog
He didn't
detective
look
and
too
grandfatherly
uniformed
officers were walking out from
annoyed.
behind the
You are a
curtains as for the
persistent
flat tire.
pest, mister.
Richard
Bennett,
was handcuffed
Robert
and called
crawled
out,
out,
flashing
smoothing
bulbs
his
of the
lapels.
paparazzi as
I
they
should have
dragged
had
him
you
around
dragged,
in the river
screaming
with Arthur.
threats.
Victoria
Victoria
stepped out
looked
from
at
behind
Caleb.
Liam. The crowd
The rain
erupted
soaked
into
her velvet
applause,
dress,
not for the
ruining
business,
it,
but she
for the
looked like a
show.
vengeful goddess. Victoria didn't
You killed
acknowledge
him,
them.
she
She
screamed.
walked over to
He was
Caleb,
your best
who was
friend.
straightening his
He was a
tie.
fool.
You
Robert
cleaned up
shouted
nice,
back,
Ross,
his composure
she said,
cracking.
a genuine smile
He was
breaking
going to
through.
give the company away to
I
charity,
try.
to
Caleb
employee
grinned.
ownership
Does
trusts.
this mean I get that bonus?
He was going to ruin
Victoria
everything
laughed.
we built.
A free,
I saved
happy
the
sound.
company,
Victoria.
She reached out and
I
pulled
did it
his
for the
tie,
legacy.
bringing his
Gasped,
face down
you
to
did it
hers.
for the money. I think we
Liam
can
growled,
negotiate.
stepping
She whispered.
forward.
And
In
now
front of the board,
Robert
the
sneered,
press and her
pulling
grinning
a
daughter
pistol from
the
his
ice
coat.
queen of Seattle,
I'm
kissed the
going to
mechanic
finish
from
the
soda.
job. A tragic
And she
she
didn't
didn't care
wrong.
who was watching.
The
CEO
6
and
months
her
later,
bodyguard. The rain in
he
Seattle
raised
was
the
just
gun.
as wet.
Liam pushed
But it
Victoria
didn't
behind
feel
a
as
dumpster
cold.
just as
It
the
was a
shot rang
Sunday
out,
morning.
chipping the
The
brick
garage
work.
door of Ross and
Stay
Sterling
down,
Restorations,
Liam commanded.
formerly Ross
Liam,
Auto Repair,
no.
rolled
Liam
up.
didn't listen.
The shop
He wasn't
hadn't
a
expanded.
bodyguard
It
anymore.
now took up the
He was
entire
a father
block.
fighting for
The
his
peeling
daughter's
paint was
future
gone,
and a man fighting
replaced
for
by
the woman
brick
who
and
had
ivy,
seen him
but the
when he
heart
was
of the place
invisible.
remained.
He
It
charged.
still smelled
Robert
of oil,
fired
coffee,
again,
and
the
hard
bullet
work.
grazed Liam's
Caleb
shoulder,
walked out,
spinning him
wiping
around.
his hands on
Victoria
a rag.
screamed,
He wasn't
but Liam
wearing a
didn't fall.
tuxedo today.
He used the
Just his
momentum to
trusty
swing
coveralls,
heavy trash
though these
can
were
lift
newer
and
and
had
had his
hurling
name
it
stitched
like a
in gold
discus.
thread, a gift
It
from
struck
Sophie.
Robert's hand,
All
sending
right,
the gun
ease off the
clattering into a
clutch.
storm drain.
Slowly, Caleb
Liam
called
was on
out.
him a second
The
later.
silver
He didn't hit
1957
him. He
Mercedes-Benz
grabbed Robert by the
300
lapels and
roadster
slammed him
lurched
into the
forward,
side of
then
the town
stalled
car
with a
so
violent
hard the
jerk.
window shattered.
Chloe groaned,
That's for
dropping
Arthur.
her forehead
Liam
onto the
snarled.
steering wheel.
He slammed him
I'm
again.
going to ruin
That's
it.
for Victoria.
Mom is
He
going
pulled
to kill
Robert's
me.
face close.
Your mom
His
isn't
voice
going to
dropping
kill
to that
you.
terrifying
Caleb
whisper.
said, leaning into the cockpit.
And this is for the 2 years
And
I
you
spent
can't scrub
scrubbing
this
your
car.
floors while you
We
lived in a
rebuilt it to
mansion.
survive a nuclear
Sirens
blast.
wailed in the
Try
distance.
again. Give
The
it a little
NYPD
more
was
gas this
coming.
time.
Liam
Chloe
let
took a
Robert
deep
slide
breath.
down the side
She
of the
looked
car,
different
a
now.
broken,
The
leafy
fear that
mess.
had defined her face
He
that
turned to
rainy night
Victoria.
6 months
He was
ago was
bleeding
gone,
from his shoulder,
replaced by a
soaking
confident
his
glow.
white shirt crimson.
She turned the
She
key.
ran to him,
the engine
ignoring
roared
the
to life,
rain,
ignoring
she
the
eased the
sirens.
clutch out,
Gave it
she
gas,
pressed her
and
hands
the car
to his
rolled
wound.
smoothly onto
You're
the
shot.
asphalt.
She sobbed.
I did it.
It is but a
She
scratch.
screamed over the engine
Liam
noise.
smiled weakly.
Keep your
his
eyes on the
adrenaline
road.
fading.
Caleb
Did you
laughed,
get it?
jogging
Victoria
to the
reached
passenger
into
side
her
and
bodice
hopping
and
in.
pulled out her
They
phone.
drove towards
The
the
voice
estate,
memo
the
app
wind
was
in their
running.
hair.
The waveform
When they
was still
pulled up the
recording.
long driveway,
Every
the gates
word,
opened
she
instantly.
whispered. He
But instead
confessed.
of the oppressive
It's over.
silence that
Liam
used to
looked
hang
at
over
her,
the Sterling
rain dripping
mansion
from his
there was
eyelashes.
noise. The distance
Music,
between them,
pop music,
CEO and
on the
Janitor,
front lawn,
rich and
Victoria
poor, had
Sterling,
been washed
the
away
ice
by the
queen
blood and the
herself,
rain. Was barefoot.
barefoot. Good. She was running through a sprinkler with 8-year-old Sophie. He collapsed into her arms. Caleb watched from the waiting room, a lump forming in his throat. Jude's hospital was quiet. Victoria was laughing. It had been 3 days since the dress soaked. The scandal was the biggest in Wall Street history. Younger, lighter, Robert Croft was in federal custody and denied bail. Looked at Caleb. Simon Draxler had turned witness in exchange for leniency. Victoria sat in a plastic chair wearing jeans and a sweater she had bought at a gift shop. Caleb said. She hadn't left the hospital. Sophie saw them and came sprinting over, tackling Caleb with a wet hug. The double doors opened. Daddy, Victoria, let me eat ice cream for breakfast. He looked tired but was smiling. Caleb raised an eyebrow
Victoria
at Victoria,
stood up so
who was
fast
walking
she knocked
over,
her coffee
wringing out her
over.
wet hair.
How is she?
It was
Sophie
organic
is a
matcha
fighter.
ice cream.
The doctor
Victoria
said the transplant
was
successful.
breathless and smiling.
Her vitals are strong.
That
She's
counts
going
as a
to breathe
vegetable.
on her own.
I don't think
Victoria,
that's how science
she's
works.
going to grow
Vic.
up.
Caleb,
And Victoria let
grinned,
out a breath
pulling
she
her in
felt
for a
like
kiss.
she'd been holding
She
for a
tasted
week.
like rain and
She
sugar.
covered her face with her
Richard was
hands
gone,
and wept.
serving
And
5
the other
to 10 in a
patient,
minimum
she
security
asked,
facility
wiping her
for
eyes,
corporate fraud and
"Mister,
theft.
Bennett is in
The divorce
recovery
had
just
been
down the
finalized
hall.
last week.
He's
Sterling
stubborn.
Dynamics
He tried
was
to get out of bed
but
an hour
Victoria
ago to
would
check
4
on his
days a
daughter.
week now.
We had to
The
sedate
other 3
him.
belonged to
Victoria
this.
laughed.
The family
A
they
wet
had
choke
cobbled
sound.
together from
That
broken
sounds
parts.
like him.
She
Later
walked
that
down the
evening,
hallway to
after
room
the girls had
304.
crashed on the couch
Liam was
watching
awake.
a movie.
He was
Caleb
pale.
and
His
Victoria
shoulder
sat on the
bandaged
terrace
heavily,
overlooking
hooked
the
up to
sound.
monitors. The
But when
Mercedes
she
sat
walked
in
in
the
driveway,
his blue eyes
gleaming
lit
in
up.
the twilight.
Did they tell
You
you?
know, he
Victoria
rasped.
said softly,
Sophie,
resting
she's
her head
perfect.
on Caleb's
Victoria
shoulder.
said, sitting
I
on the
used
edge
to
of
hate
his
that
bed.
car. It was
She
a
took his
coffin to me.
hand, the hand
And
that
now,
had held a
now
mop,
she
a
looked
gun,
at the silver
and her
curve
life.
of the fender,
Then
she's
at the man
going to
holding
be
her
okay.
hand.
Liam,
Now
you
it's
did
the
it.
reason I have a
Liam
life.
stared at the ceiling,
Caleb squeezed
blinking
her
back
hand.
tears.
It wasn't the
I
car,
didn't do it.
Vic.
You did.
The car was
You
just
paid
the
for the
metal.
best surgeons
You
in
did
the
the work.
country.
We did
You
the
paid
work.
with your
She
blood.
corrected.
Victoria said
She pulled
softly.
a small box
I
out
think
of her
that
pocket.
covers the deductible.
It wasn't a ring.
Silence
Not
settled
yet.
between
It was
them,
a key,
comfortable
a
and
brand
warm.
new key to the
So
estate.
Liam said,
Looking
"Move
at
in."
her,
I
she
guess
said
I'm
officially,
fired.
I'm tired
Can't
of
have
you
a
driving home
bodyguard
to
with
DeSoto
a hoe
every
his
night.
shoulder.
Caleb
You're
looked
right,
at the key,
Victoria
then at
said,
the woman
her
who had
face
once
serious.
threatened to
You are
foreclose on his
fired.
existence.
Liam's face fell.
He thought
He
about
pulled
the
his
empty
hand
apartment,
away.
the debt,
Oh,
the loneliness.
right. I understand.
Then he looked
Back
at the
to the
warmth
mop
in her
bucket,
eyes.
I guess.
Only if I
No,
get to park the
Victoria
truck in the
said.
garage
She
next
reached
to the
into her
McLaren.
bag and
He
pulled
said,
out a document.
Deal.
I don't need
She
a bodyguard
smiled.
anymore.
Caleb took the key.
I need a partner.
He didn't know
She
what the
handed him the
future held.
paper.
He
It
knew
was a
engines
deed of
would
trust.
break, tires
I'm
would go
restructuring
flat,
the company.
and storms would
Employee
come.
ownership.
But
Just
as he
like
looked at
my father
Victoria,
wanted.
he knew they
And I
had the
need
tools
someone
to
to
fix
run the
whatever
new
broke.
Sterling and Bennett Foundation,
Hey,
the
Vic,
charitable
yeah,
arm dedicated
remind
to
me to thank
healthcare for
Chloe.
families of
For
blue-collar
what?
workers.
For not knowing how to
Liam
change a
stared
tire.
at the paper.
Victoria laughed,
and the
I
sound
don't know
drifted
how to
out
run
over
a
the
foundation.
water. Brighter than
Clear
the city
throat,
lights.
you know what it's
Proving
like
once
to be
and for
invisible.
all that while money
Victoria
could buy a
said,
house,
leaning in
only
close.
love could build a home.
You know what it's
Caleb
like to need
Ross
help
thought
and
he
not
was
get
just
it.
fixing a flat
That
tire
makes
in
you
the
more
rain.
qualified than any
He didn't
MBA
know he
I
was
know.
repairing 2 broken
She
families.
brushed a lock of dark
in a
hair
world
off
that
his
often
forehead.
tells us to look
Besides,
away, to
she
keep
whispered,
driving, and to
echoing
mind
the
our
moment
own
in her
business
office that
Caleb
started
stopped.
it all. He
I
proved
can't
that the
sleep
currency
unless
of
I know you're
character is
nearby.
worth more than any
Liam
bank
looked at
account.
her.
The barriers
Victoria
were gone.
Sterling
Is
had
that a
billions,
condition
but
of
she was
employment?
bankrupt in the
He
things
asked,
that mattered
a crooked
until a
grin
mechanic
forming.
with grease on his
Strictly
hands showed her
mandatory.
that strength
She
isn't
smiled.
about being hard.
He reached up with his good
It's
arm,
about being
cupping
able
her
to
cheek,
rebuild after
pulling
you
her
break.
down. They say
When
you
he
can't
kissed
judge
her,
a book
it
by
wasn't
its cover,
tentative,
but maybe
it
the real
tasted of
lesson is that you
sterilization
shouldn't
and
judge
judge
in
a
a
future
future
that
by
was
his bank
finally
balance or a
bright.
billionaire by her icy
The
stare.
view from the 42nd
Under the
floor was
hood,
different
we're all
now.
just trying
The
to get
office
home
was
safely.
brighter.
The
What an
intimidating
incredible
mahogany desk
journey
was
for
gone,
Caleb and
replaced
Victoria.
by a modern
If this
glass
story
table
touched
covered
your
in
heart,
crayon drawings.
please hit that like button.
A little girl with
It
curly
really
hair
helps us
ran
share more
across the
stories
plush
like
carpet,
this.
laughing.
And what about you?
She had no
Have you ever
oxygen
had
tank.
a random act of
She was
kindness
chasing
change
a
your
golden
life?
retriever puppy.
Let me know in the
Sophie,
comments
don't
below.
run in the boardroom.
I'd love to read
Liam
your
called
stories.
out, chasing
Don't
after
forget
her.
to subscribe and
He
turn on
wasn't
the
wearing a
notification
tuxedo
bell so
or
you never
jumpsuit.
miss a new story.
He was wearing a soft
Thanks for
cashmere
listening
sweater
and
and
remember
jeans.
sometimes
He
the
looked
wrong
healthy,
turn leads to the
happy,
right
and
place.
loved. Victoria stood by the window, watching them. The city lights twinkled below, but they didn't look like short circuits anymore. They looked like stars. Liam scooped Sophie up, swinging her around until she shrieked with joy, then walked over to the window. He wrapped his free arm around Victoria's waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, kissing her temple. Victoria leaned back into him. She looked at her reflection in the glass, no longer the ice queen, but a woman who was awake. "I was thinking about that night," she said softly, "when I pretended to sleep." Liam laughed, the sound rumbling in his chest. "Best nap you ever took. You whispered that you couldn't save him." Victoria turned to look at him, her eyes fierce with love. "You were wrong, Liam. You saved his legacy, and you saved me." Liam smiled, kissing her forehead, then Sophie's nose. "We We saved each other, little V, he whispered. We saved each other. Outside, the rain began to fall on Seattle, washing the streets clean, ready for a new day. From the bottom of a trash can to the top of the world, Liam didn't just scrub floors. He scrubbed away the lies that destroyed a family. Victoria and Liam proved that sometimes the only way to wake up is to close your eyes and trust the one person everyone else ignores. If this story touched your heart, if you believe that true heroes wear work boots and that love can heal even the deepest scars, please hit that like button. It helps us share these stories with the world. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a drama. And tell me in the comments, would you have trusted Liam? Thanks for watching. See you in the next.